Now joining us from the Daily Wire, Harry Khachatrian. He's been a very frequent guest on Backlash. You can follow Harry on Twitter at Harry1T6. So, Harry, I just wanted to start off by, I'm sure you saw this, the Women's March posted today about the birthday of Assata Shakur, basically wishing her a happy birthday, and they went on to basically, we're going to get into their tweets later about why it is that they're such big fans of her. But why is it that, could you please provide the audience some background information on who is exactly Assata Shakur? I know she's had many run-ins, and she's a cop with the law. She's murdered a police officer. Is there any more background that people need to know? Who is Assata Shakur?
So Assata Shakur, she murdered a police officer. She was also involved with a terrorist organization, the Black Liberation organization, something along. It was just a more fringe element of the Black Panthers, and I think they were involved in several bombings. Just some of the fringest elements of the far left, and in, I believe it was 1979, she escaped from prison where she fled to communist Cuba, and she's been hiding there ever since. And there's, I believe, a $2 million prize for her capture and return to America. So, she is anyone who is sort of not even non-political in any sense. If you tell them about who this woman is, they will have no problem, I guess, taking the side that she's a completely insane terrorist. Well, insane is the wrong word to use. She's a maliciously vile individual. There's nothing, I think, there's really no question about the fact that she's a deeply evil person who is deeply rooted in the political left. Now, I guess the question of why they would embrace her, we could certainly get into that. Do you want to go on into why the Women's March held her up as a feminist icon?
Yeah, sure. It seems like the left, very often, it feels the need, it sides with so many of these people, and it feels the need to defend so many, there's a list goes on and on. Shakur, Linda Sarsour, who just called for jihad on Trump, and you can get into that, you can have a whole conversation on that even. And Keith Ellison, Keith, a.k.a. I like to call him Keith X. It's not even I like to call him, that's what he went by. I mean, why does the left like to embrace such figures? It seems extremely... seems to turn off a lot of people, and it should.
Yes, and I said those are wonderful examples. I think there's even a few more. A sort of even larger example would be the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where many on the left side with the Palestinians, despite objective facts that Palestinians perpetrate acts of terrorism, that they literally pay the families of terrorists who murder Jews and whatnot, and still members of the far left, and thankfully it's still I think there is some glimmer of hope that this hasn't seeped into what we like to call sort of the mainstream liberal view in America, where this is it's still possible. It's getting harder, but it is possible to call this the far left, not the mainstream left. But I think really what it sort of comes down to is there's really two big things that people on the left push. And this is in colleges as well. One of them is the intersectional politics, and the other one is the microaggression stuff. So with intersectionality, I think really what the idea that they push here is the fact that there are all these oppressed groups that really have nothing to do with each other, but they are all tied together because they have a common oppressor, which is sort of
the white people.
American Western
straight white cis males,
Christian, Jewish, So, that's sort of they group together, I guess, the United States and Israel. They're sort of both, the colonialist oppressors, so to speak, and then any sort of action that is taken against them, despite the methods. And this is even, I know you wanted to get into the tweets where Women's March justified it. One of their tweets was like, we have different tactics of fighting oppression, but that does not mean that we disagree on our ends. So, what they're really trying to say is that the means are not so much important. What really matters is they're fighting this boogeyman oppression that we have created.
Yeah.
Go on. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So the woman marches, basically they were tweeting, the tweet you're referring to is hashtag Assata Shakur's resistance tactics were different than ours. That doesn't mean we do not respect her anti-sexism work. And the next tweet, they had like a 20-tweet chain. The next one was, Assata Shakur took a militant approach. We do not. That doesn't mean we don't respect and appreciate her anti-racism work. So basically, the Women's March is saying we aren't militants, but we respect and appreciate militant, violent protest. Right? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So my thoughts are, I guess they're not quite stupid enough to endorse acts of terrorism, but they are malicious enough to side with the intentions of the actual terrorists. And I think this speaks to the fact that the far left is increasingly spiraling into complete lunacy. I think we're maybe less than a year away from these people on the left basically holding up Osama bin Laden as their new, freedom fighter to say that, we disagree with some of his tactics. Maybe he went a bit far in flying planes in the World Trade Center, but look, he was fighting. He was a resistance member. He was, this is, the same people who still idolize like Che Guevara. Even in America, a more recent example was whenever there were the Black Lives Matter riots in Ferguson. I believe it was either the mayor of the city or the police captain who basically said, we should just let the rioters. Just don't let the police stop the rioters. Just give them room to destroy because their grievances are excused by the fact that they've been oppressed by the police presence that actually exists in the city. So, this is horrifying to see, but this is far widespread on the political left. The idea that violence can be justified, so long as the intentions are there to fight oppression, and again, oppression is how people on the left define it, which is basically capitalism, white people, and really going down that list, everything.
Right. And don't you think in the political climate, the current political climate, it's gotten the rhetoric, as we know, after the Scalise shooting, everyone went crazy about violent rhetoric, especially the left. Like, I know some people on the right are also doing the same thing where they're trying to say that speech is violence, but the left is the number one advocate of this. Like, it seems so inappropriate that they would side with someone not only who spoke violence, who actually performed violence, and they say, well, we appreciate what she did. It seems extremely inappropriate to me.
It does, and as I was saying before, it is still possible to call this sort of far left and distinguish it from sort of mainstream left, and I think that the best hope that we have is people who do see themselves as sort of more mainstream liberals, would actually come out and be some of the loudest voices. I think this is sort of the idea of like when people say moderate Muslims should, be like a loud voice in opposing radicalization. I think people who see themselves as sort of Democrats who maybe they believe in higher taxes and socialized government, but they're still reasonable individuals who can say that we shouldn't praise terrorists as freedom fighters. I think they really do need to come out and condemn the far left and say that this 100%. Is not where the Democrat Party is headed.
And as we saw actually on, and not to get too carried away, but we saw Ben Shapiro go on, I believe it was Fox News with the person from CARE, their representative, and they would refuse to condemn the Muslim Brotherhood, etc. But anyway, switching gears a little bit, let's talk about the GOP healthcare situation, the Trump care. President Trump, he's constantly referred to the AHCA, the American Health Care Act. He's constantly referred to it as a disaster throughout the campaign. He's referred to it the disaster Obamacare in his Twitter consistently, and he still does it. And the GOP has run for 7 years on repealing and replacing Obamacare. So in a nutshell, it's obviously a huge issue, but if you could, in a nutshell, explain what are the biggest issues with Obamacare that make it such a disaster?
My understanding of, and then I guess to point out to the audience, I am a Canadian, so I live under a totally different healthcare system.
Right.
We have full socialism here, but the AHCA was, I think, as many commentators have put it, it was a way to sort of inch the American healthcare system closer to what we have in Canada.
Totally.
And I guess many elements of it do borrow from the socialist system in a sense that it does redistribute costs of healthcare because it places the onus on young people to enlist in Obamacare, and by sort of, by having this huge pool of young people, they would basically use this to pay for healthcare for people who don't, aren't paying for it themselves, like old people and poor people. And and it was, in effect, whether it was specifically designed to, or it was sort of as a result of incompetence or intention, but the fact is that there was no economical way this would survive on its own, because as it turned out, the actual plans offered under Obamacare to young people were not particularly affordable. So people, even though Obamacare basically made it illegal to not buy these insurance plans, which is, I guess, a whole other, issue of the fact that federal government literally said, it is illegal for you not to purchase a product, which is, insane. If you think about any other market, something like this happening, like, can you imagine tomorrow the federal government comes out and says, if you don't buy the latest iPhone, we're going to penalize you, money every year.
Right.
Right, or just a ridiculous idea on its own. And so, what happened is that, this was the individual mandate where it says you have to have insurance or we're going to charge you money. And still, people couldn't afford the premiums on these Obamacare plans because, as it turns out, you can either have good quality care or you can have widespread care. But there's no way to give everyone everything, in a sense.
Right.
And so what you had was people who are like 22-year-old men were paying for, healthcare plans that covered things like maternal care, that covered like retirement-specific services, like things they would never need, and services that in a free market system, no insurer would say, why don't you pay for this? Because they wouldn't need it. But under the sort of regulations of Obamacare, they were basically forced to pay for things they wouldn't need to, and thus they couldn't afford it. So what happened was there was no money in this pool that was meant to be redistributed, and slowly the insurers pulled out because they were not making any money.
Right.
And the issue at hand now is that Republicans, even before Obamacare passed, Republicans were saying that this is not going to work, but Democrats, who at the time controlled the House and Senate, they forced Obamacare through with, as many people would recall, with not a single Republican vote towards Obamacare, and they passed it through. And as you said, for 7 years they said we're going to get rid of it, and it's disappointing that now they seem to not be having any luck so far. The replacement options that they put forth, I think, have been not particularly encouraging, though, as someone who's kind of read them. I think that I haven't seen a bill that I wholeheartedly appreciate. Like, I think they've rolled back some of it, but what they've sort of mostly, I think, focused on is
Obamacare light, pretty much, and it's just
Obamacare light,
like Medicaid cuts.
Yeah, and they like what they've done in many cases is they've cut actual funding, but they haven't cut offering services. So they're still offering things, but now they can't even pay for them. And I suppose one explanation is they're afraid of bad optics, in the sense that they don't want, because they're going to lose their seats basically if they do what they actually promised to do. This is what they're scared of. And and I think there's a good way to argue against that, which is to say that, well, Democrats aren't going to vote for Republicans anyway because they're Democrats, and the people who are Republicans aren't going to, if Republicans go back on their promise, they're going to lose more Republican votes than they would have gained Democrats by, passing Obamacare light. So, it's definitely discouraging to see. At the present, I think Donald Trump just recently, his most recent statement was that he's just going to go ahead and leave Obamacare to fail on its own. And if Democrats were this confident with Obamacare, I suppose they should have nothing to be worried about. One good thing I see from this is the fact that the Affordable Care Act name is intrinsically tied to Barack Obama's name. This is the Obamacare healthcare plan. So, given the fact that the Republicans haven't passed any legislation now, the shortcomings with the healthcare system can be directly pinned on the Democrat Party, who passed this without any Republican support.
So what do you think? Why? What is the reason that nothing's getting done? As you said, like, it seems like there's a lot of different opinions on what needs to be done. Like, some people want a clean repeal. Some people just want it to be Obamacare light. Some people just want to say, hey, just let it fail. Like, why do we need to even replace this? Like, it seems politically expedient to just let it go. So who do you think is really at fault of this? Is it more the Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, who seem to have no backbone, and they don't seem to be strongly rooted in conservative values, and they don't care too much about it? Or do you think it's more the moderate senators or the much more conservative senators who both won't compromise, like Susan Collins, Rob Portman, and these types of moderates? Or Mike Lee just announced that he's not going to support this bill. So do you think it's more on the senators, or do you think it's more on the leadership?
Personally, as someone who's lived for several years now under the sort of socialized healthcare system in Canada, and really wants to see Obamacare completely repealed in favor of a far more free market oriented system, I place a lot of the blame on what's happening on the leadership, on the spineless political positions of Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan. I think that what they need to do is put their conservative convictions ahead of worrying about the New York Times publishing mean articles about them, and really dismantle the key parts of Obamacare and specific regulations that are holding back competition in the marketplace. I think that once people see the fact that there is no reason that healthcare can't work like any other industry in the free market, I think they will come on board. Like if senators were to start suggesting that we need to regulate cell phones the same way healthcare is regulated, I don't think anyone would be happy. The price of the iPhone would go up like 5 times within a year. So yeah, I think that the root of the problem here is that the leadership Republican individuals are afraid to do what they need to do.
Right. So on a separate topic, we all know the story. On July 11th, Donald Trump Jr., he released his email conversations between him and his campaign and the Russian officials and the Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya. Based on his emails and many other new details are coming out, it seems like he went into the meeting pretty much. It seems pretty clear that he went in there looking for negative information on Hillary. Do you think that this story, obviously the media is making a massive deal about this. If you listen to CNN at all, basically all day it's just about Trump Jr. committed treason, basically, on CNN and the mainstream, right, which is totally BS. But basically all the media, the entire mainstream media seems to be thinking that basically Trump's going to be impeached tomorrow because Trump Jr. met with this Russian lawyer. So do you think maybe the media's being a little overzealous here?
Well, I think overzealous is almost an understatement. I mean, you can definitely argue over the nuances of whether what Trump Jr. did was moral or ethical, but the fact is that he was a private citizen. He was digging for information about a political opponent, and I think anyone who's in the news, anyone who's like a columnist, a writer, they all look for sources on things to report on opposition members, and as it turns out, Donald Trump Jr. is just much more connected than the average person. So instead of Googling, he can email a Russian lawyer with more information. And I mean, you're free to argue that he did the wrong thing, and sure, you can hold that opinion, but he broke no existing law. And it's worth mentioning that Hillary Clinton and her campaign was in contact with the Ukrainian embassy, trying to do research about digging up dirt on Donald Trump and his campaign. So the media is just very hypocritical. It tends to have a total double standard. When a Republican does something, it's the end of the world. And even I'm not advocating for what he did. It's whether, like you said, it's a totally different debate whether or not he should have done it. But the fact that the media reports on this like he committed treason, and Hillary Clinton, like, it doesn't even report on it. So it just seems like a total double standard, no? Yeah, it's no surprise that there's a huge double standard when it comes to reporting on Democrats and Republicans in the media. I haven't seen a second-by-second CNN breakdown on the handshakes that Barack Obama was having with world leaders.
Right. So one of the actual issues in this Don Jr., other than obviously the more from a moral standpoint in terms of trying to get opposition research and the avenue he was doing, but one of the issues seemingly with Don Jr.'s meeting, especially to me, it seems like the White House had a lack of honesty in terms of what was going on here. First of all, Kushner was denying it, and Kushner denied ever being there. They were lying about. It seems pretty clear that they were lying a lot about what the contents of the meeting were. So, do you think that this is that this lack of integrity from our White House? Do you think that's of any concern?
I certainly think that was very bad optics. One thing I thought was interesting was that sort of in the aftermath of this coming out, Donald Trump Jr. went ahead and just tweeted the actual screenshots of the emails, which I thought was quite interesting.
Right.
I'm kind of curious what his lawyer had to say about that, but I think it was an interesting move, to say the least. I think what it sort of did was it basically put all the information out there, and it took the power away from the media to spin things, because you could just, you could read them for yourself and make up your own mind. I think that the people who were higher up and knew about this, I think they should have known that no law was actually broken. So instead of trying to sort of downplay the whole thing and say nothing really happened, it would have looked a lot better from the start if they just said, well, Donald Trump Jr. was, just a private citizen like any other guy, and all he was doing was trying to dig up information with his sources. So I agree with you completely. I think that was horrible optics. I think that when you know that you haven't done anything wrong, you should just come out and say it instead of being caught in a situation like this. Absolutely,
looks much better. So thank you very much, Harry. At Harry1T6, everybody go and follow Harry. He does excellent work for the Daily Wire. And Harry, we appreciate you coming on again.
Yeah, I'm always happy to come on. Thanks so much.